Hello and welcome to our election special at Boom, US Election Simplified. All through the series, the past few days, we've focused on the basics, and right now we're focusing on what it means for the world and for India specifically to have a Joseph Biden presidency. And joining us to talk about that is Pramit Pal Chaudhuri. He's the foreign editor at Hindustan Times and a fellow at Ananda Aspen Center. Pramit, thanks very much for joining us. You know, there's so much to talk about how a Biden and Harris presidency and vice presidency is going to affect India. There are so many different spokes to that conversation. So my first question really is, how is it going to impact our strategic establishment? Specifically, how is it going to impact our dynamics vis-a-vis China and Pakistan and Afghanistan?
The Biden on China in particular, there's a broad common agreement between Democrats and Republicans that China will be in America's #1 strategic competitor, rival over the next few decades. I think there's no differences on that opinion. The real issue is, what tactics do you use to handle China? What's your strategy? There, as far as we can tell, there is a clear difference. The Biden administration, because it's very concerned about America's domestic issues, wants to cut defense expenditure, and therefore it will, and believes that it can compensate for this, if you wish, by revitalizing America's alliance structure, which to some degree was either neglected or ignored by the Trump administration, which was much more unilateral in its thinking. So we'll see the Biden administration reach out to more of its allies, especially in Asia, the 5 major treaty allies, its strategic partners like India and let's say Indonesia and so on, and try to build up more of a diplomatic, economic, technological coalition against China, while de-emphasizing the military. So you often, I think, at least for the first year, you'll see the Biden administration go through the motions on the Quad, for example, but not really see the Quad as being a cornerstone of its response to China. That will be different, obviously, from the Trump administration. I think the Indian view is that the Biden administration is fooling itself that they think China is not going to see this as a sign of weakness, and will probably test China sometime in the first year of his administration. Maybe on our border, maybe on Taiwan, maybe on something else. So they're not overly concerned that the Indo-Pacific strategy or tactics are different. They just don't think it's going to survive for very long. On Afghanistan, they're actually quite happy with Biden, because Biden has made it clear he doesn't support a wholesale U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. He believes that at least a few thousand troops handling counterterrorism operations against the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, Islamic State should retain, which is completely in alignment with what India would like to see.
Right. I want to ask a question about what it means for knowledge transfer and specifically for the defense establishment. But there's also another major concern for many Indians, which is the visa regime. And is it going to be easier to get visas? Is there going to be any change in immigration policies? Or is that something that takes much longer to change? What is your opinion on how a Biden presidency is going to change that?
I'll just address immigration first. Immigration is largely the prerogative of the U.S. Congress, more so than it is the prerogative of the White House. If the president happens to be very strong, he can dictate or push the immigration policies in a certain direction. My impression is that Joe Biden will be a weak president. He has already indicated privately, I believe, that he will only be there for 1 term. He's too old to continue. He's just there to stop Trump, nothing else. He will probably, he may not control the Senate. We'll only know that in January, when the last Georgia runoff is finished. If he does not control the Senate, then he will have a major problem, because Trump retains complete control of his party. Trump will have an extraordinarily difficult transfer of power. He will fight, pick, scheme, make it horribly difficult for Biden. If he then also has his party control the Senate, there will be very little cooperation between the two sides. So a weak Biden will not be able to dictate very much on immigration. So while Biden has said that he wants to open up the doors on H-1B, he wants to give illegal immigrants a path to citizenship, he wants to give the spouses of H-1B and L visas the path to citizenship, my sense is too weak to push those through. Some sort of rollback will happen, at least on H-1Bs perhaps, but on immigration, it will be a long and steady battle between the two sides. It'll be more about the U.S. dynamics in the U.S. Congress than it will be necessarily about the White House. It won't be quite as bad as the Trump administration, but I don't expect more than, let's say, a 10 or 15% rollback.
Okay. What then understood, and it's pretty clear, and those who are hoping for an easier visa regime are probably going to get disappointed. But that, of course, we'll see as it unfolds. What about the other area? Kamala Harris specifically, who's going to be vice president, has spoken a lot about human rights. Joe Biden has also spoken a lot about human rights, and America has seen itself as the conscience keeper of the world in many, many cases. How then will that impact India's perspective, specifically with the CAA law and the NRC, coming across and proposed across India?
So the bulk of the human rights, the liberal left criticism of the Modi government has been either about two things: Article 370's abrogation, or, as you mentioned, the Citizenship Amendment Act. But the comments that they have made have been actually quite vague, which is sort of Kamala Harris, in speaking in front of Pakistani American fundraisers, has said that we're watching the situation in Kashmir. Biden has said, I will have a chat, I will talk to Modi, and I will talk to the Indian government about this. Now, if you look at the core foreign policy advisors, remember the vice president in most US government has almost no say on foreign policy. Right? There's zero, they don't have, and their role is only they do a bit of handshaking, ribbon cutting, they are in the meetings, but foreign policy and major policy issues, the vice president's office is not there. So the real issue is, what does the core foreign policy team of Biden think about these issues? And these are people who will be Secretary of State, National Security Advisor, Pentagon Chief, and so on. If you look at their public statements, I think it's relatively clear their view is, one, our overriding interest is a number of major foreign policy themes: climate, China, so on, in which India is a vital partner. We need to have India on board. Without India, none of these policies work. Yes, we have a concern, and the Progressive Caucus, the left wing of the Democratic Party, which has been the most vociferous about this, about what Modi is doing, how is he being illiberal, if you wish, in his policies, particularly his treatment of minorities. But what I think one of the advisors said in an interview, and was asked specifically about this question in America, he says, yes, we have some concerns. We'll see what this actually means. And we will engage with India on these issues. We will talk to India about these issues. But we always keep in mind that India is, as I think the term is a vitally important partner for what we want to accomplish on the foreign policy side. So when I've talked to Indian officials, they said this is the kind of language that the Americans have always used, which is we have to make some noises about this issue.
Right.
And then after we've done that, we can go back and say, hey, we gave him a lecture. Now we go to the real portion of the agenda, which is climate, China, and so on. So my impression is that no, there will be a steady beat of criticism, rhetorical. After that, nothing. And the only potential area that America could give us some leverage on the United States will be something what you mentioned earlier, which is on the defense side, defense technology, defense armaments. That's the only area where the Congress could come in and say, no, we're going to put a block on a certain kind of weapon system or the transfer of a certain type of technology because of human rights issues. And I think when I was on the Indian side, they said, that's fine. We've already bought a huge amount of weapon. We're not planning to buy very much. Most of the new weapons or systems we're buying are not even American. If the Americans don't want to sell us the weapon, then we'll go elsewhere. It's not a big issue. We've been doing that for decades. But their view is that even that is very unlikely to happen in this administration. And if the Republicans control the Senate, that's even less likely.
Got it. One final question, more of a generic kind of question. When you look back on previous presidents, Bush, Obama, Trump, and now Biden, do you see continuity or do you see change starting 2021?
Well, I'd say if you go back to the Clinton administration, where we had the nuclear tests, which obviously froze the relationship, but Clinton at that point, and I remember this was important, here was a major rupture between the two countries. We carried out a nuclear test in defiance of the West. The West imposed sanctions. But what does Clinton do? Within a year, he says, okay, let's roll this back. Let's have a discussion. This famous Talbot Just One Thing dialogue was held, and
Yeah.
the Americans began to roll this back quite quickly. The Bush administration comes in and says, okay, actually, we think it's a good thing you've done the nuclear tests. We want you to be a nuclear power because we see China as a problem and we need to build you up. And I remember talking to somebody in the Bush administration, and I'm saying, do you want us to, are you going to constrain our ability to build nuclear weapons? He said, no, we want you to build more nuclear weapons. You have to be a power. The whole idea is to make you a superpower. So if that's what we're doing, then obviously you do whatever you want to be a military power. That's why we're doing a nuclear deal with you. Obama, I think the first year he didn't have a very clear vision of us, and definitely he saw China as the country he wanted to work with. But by the second term, he was not overly different from the Bush administration. The Trump administration has given us a hard time on a few things like trade, and I think that will continue, even if the language will be a little less hard from the Biden administration. But on defense, there has been no administration has given us more access to high-level defense technology or proffered more and more material to us, actually more than we can absorb. So the relationship has been, there's been a few blips here and there, but the broad relationship has been steadily but surely increasing. And it is now built not just on one or two items, it is built on common concern about China, enormous economic relationship. I mean, you look at what Amazon, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, the amount of money they're investing in this country. And remember, they can't invest in China. So for them, and they're even struggling a bit in Europe. So we are obviously the place they see as their future. Facebook's next billion customers are going to come from India.
Yes.
And very powerful lobby now in America saying this is where we're going. So you have a relationship and then you're going to have climate. Climate change is something Prime Minister Modi takes very seriously. Sees as existential problem facing India. It is going to be the #1 agenda on the Trump administration's book, and their teams have already reached out to the Indians, even before the election results were out, saying, how do we work with you guys? Because we're going to hit the ground running on climate, and India is absolutely central to this.
Yeah, that makes sense. And indeed, it's going to be a boost to the climate change industry in India as well, with so many experts. I'm glad you touched upon aspects of trade and the economy and business as well. These are, of course, not deep dives. That will happen as Biden assumes the presidency, and then we start commenting, of course, on what he does. But for the moment, thanks so much, Pramit Pal Chaudhuri.
Thank you.